Welcome to Her Tech Hour. Her Tech Hour is a series of educational webinars aiming to inform, connect, and develop women leaders in different fields of technology. What is special about Her Tech Hour is it was started by a group of passionate women coming from diverse backgrounds and different stages of tech careers. I'm Shriya Singh Rakal, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session titled A Day in a Life of a Product Manager. So far, we have 18 people with us joining live today, and the numbers are increasing. Let's do one thing. Why don't we all go to the chat, say a little hi, and tell us where you're all joining us from. Awesome. We have people from different places. Like our speaker is from Seattle, someone from New York. We have someone from Australia, someone from Bay Area, Minnesota, cool, Missouri. So before I introduce our speaker and hand over the controls to her, I would like to introduce a few in-house rules. First, when the speaker is talking, please turn off your video and microphone to save us some bandwidth and unwanted noise. Second, use either the chat box or the raise your hand feature to ask questions. I'll be moderating all these interactions throughout, and I'll help you, your questions get answered. And we'll also have a special Q&A session towards the end, but you are welcome to ask questions anytime throughout the presentation. Again, it's my responsibility to get your questions answered. All right. Today, we have with us Tonja Hardyman, who is a senior product manager at Groupon. She has nearly a decade of experience spanning from nonprofit websites and e-commerce to large enterprise software solutions. She's also a proud advocate of diversity and inclusion at her company, and she is very active with all the D&I efforts at her workplace. And we are very grateful to have her today with us. She's here today to share what a typical PM role entails and what are the expectations associated with the role. I hope you all will have a great time, a great learning experience today. Tonja, why don't you take it from here?
Hi everyone, thank you for the intro, Shriya. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Accidentally opened the door of the wrong program here. And share. All right. Cool. So yeah, as Shriya mentioned, please do ask questions, put them into the chat or raise your hand. We will try to pause throughout. And obviously, if you ask a question about an early part of the conversation, it might be a little tough for me to remember, but please, of course, do. We love questions in general. So just a little bit about me before we get started. As Shriya mentioned, I have about a decade of experience. I started out thinking I was going to get into international relations. And my first ever job was reporting on the UN in Geneva. This is actually where I pivoted in the first job. And I was asked to work on their website through Dreamweaver, and it became less scary. So that's when I started to think about technology. After that, I had a few more internships in various locations, companies of various sizes. Main call out here is in the first web marketing internship, I learned about search engine optimization, more website management, and targeted email campaigns and setting those up. And then I took that and applied it as the marketing manager for a snow camp for future athletes. Then the next one was becoming an account manager, and within that role, I complained probably too much in the company when they instituted a change, and I thought that they might fire me. So then I offered to become part of the solution and help manage this change process, which is how I became the product manager, actually. So I had a couple years there, worked on an MBA, then had a product internship with Samsung, which I was pretty fortunate to have, where I was working on our competitive analysis and road mapping. And here, one of my favorite call outs is, you know, being an intern at Samsung might actually be more impactful than this C-suite title of being a CEO at your own company where your sister and ex-boyfriend are working. So I did my own company for about a year of experimentation and stuff. And eventually I realized I did not want to take on the responsibility of taking investment from other people, given how I felt. So transitioned to having insurance, health insurance again, and coworkers, and worked at a company that got acquired, and then my division got divested. Within there, I went from product manager to senior product manager. I ran a team within this role of several people who were in charge of our tech roadmap for the entire company. And then finally, that brings me to today for Groupon, where we have thousands of people, and I'm again not as impactful in the entire org, but focused on something more specific. So again, feel free to chat in questions. I think Shreya will be my counterpart and help me here if there are any questions. All right, a few things about these. These were all over, so from Geneva to Chile and Argentina, and then various places throughout the United States. And that really brings me to why product management. So for product management, I was actually scared of technology when I started out. As I mentioned, I was in international relations and working on the UN. And when I started peeking into Dreamweaver and website management, I realized that it maybe wasn't as scary as I thought. So it kind of became demystified for me. And then I also realized that it's this wonderful intersection of business and technology. So you can see technologists who get really excited about their technology and why it's so cool what they've worked on. And then you can see business folks who can take that and be like, oh wow, we can make a really cool business that meets a lot of our customer needs out of that. So you're really standing in both worlds. But that's not a skill that everyone can actually do. So sometimes a technologist or a business person can't really speak very well to each other, and a PM really stands in the middle and gets to translate and speak both languages. And finally, for me, as you may have guessed, I like change a lot, so every day is different. And we'll get into that. So why is every day different for product managers? This can really depend on your team structure, your scope, and your product lifecycle. So I wanted to dig into these just a little bit for everyone, because I think that this group is potentially interested in product management for their careers. So product management is really focusing on the what and why. It's making sure that you understand the needs of the customer and then prioritizing what those needs are, identifying what it is that you should build and why, for what reason. Another PM is program management, which is fairly similar. Sometimes it can be more what and how, but it also depends on the company, as I was saying. So Microsoft has more program managers than product managers, but those of us who are product managers might say that the Microsoft PMs are the same. So they're usually what and how, and programs tend to be aligned towards a business objective, and they might have far more stakeholders instead of it's something that's more like a feature. And a third PM is project management. Project management tends to be the accountability of the timeline and who is involved to accomplish what. For how much. So this might be the cost or the head count that you need, what the budget is. And as I mentioned about Microsoft with program management, within my current company, we have program managers who do more of the project management functionality. So the hats you wear as a product manager can really vary based on how the company is set up. we also have different other types of hats in terms of functional responsibility. So depending on how high up you are, sometimes a CEO or head of product is really responsible for the strategy or vision. In several of my prior roles, I had that. Now I'm responsible for the strategy or vision. Yes.
We have a question from Rijita. She's asking us, she's asking you, would you say that program manager is the first stage for product management?
I don't know. So in no part of my career was I titled as a program manager. I think that if you're able to get into program management, it would probably be fairly easy to transition from program management into product management. And again, because you're wearing many of the same hats, so then you can really speak to the types of ownership you've had that you can leverage when you want to transition to having a product manager title. So that's a good question. I would say all three of these would get you exposure to a lot of the responsibilities, and having a skill set, building your skill set in any of these will be helpful. Thank you for the question. So just depending on the org, you can have different hats. In my prior company, we did not have a designer, like a graphic designer when I was there. They hired one later. So that meant that we might have been configuring things or drawing things ourselves, but now within Groupon, we have an entire org dedicated to design. We also might have an entire org dedicated to marketing. So again, this really depends on the size of your company and how it is structured in terms of what you might be doing in your day-to-day. And I might argue that a successful product manager is really building up their skill set in all of these areas and can flex based on what the company or the project needs. This is my last one of what is product management. So finally, it also depends. I like to think of product management as having multiple stages within the life cycle of a product. And so that means you go from discovery all the way to sunsetting of a product. And in each of those stages, you have different objectives. So for example, in discovery, really the objective or the checkpoint is there and there and there. And what that means is, does this idea have enough merit that we should continue to investigate it? Further, like, in other orgs, if you're ready to launch, that checkpoint might be, have we gone through everything we need to do in order to launch this project? So products, so that means, for example, making sure that you've taken care of your data privacy requirements, or talk to legal, or that sales has onboarded and stuff. So this may look different depending on what your product is and what your organization looks like. And finally, it tends to not be so linear. This means that you can make it a couple steps forward, learn something, and then go back again. So I have two examples that I wanted to talk about today. But before I do that, I can pause and just check in to see if we have any more questions, or if anyone wants to unmute and show their video too, they can also ask them. Otherwise, I will move forward.
We don't have any question as of now, but if anybody is willing to ask any questions, then they can unmute themselves.
Okay, so I have two exciting examples. One of them is building a button, and the other is creating an entire, enterprise software for a B2B, as a B2B solution. And I like these two examples because their impact is fairly different, and the projects themselves are radically different. So I thought that they would help talk to the day in the life of a PM fairly well. So building a button. In this scenario, we are looking at, you have your typical purchase funnel on an e-commerce site where, let's say for Amazon, first you just open up, there's the home page, and then there's no intent that you've really established when you open up and look at a home page. But let's say you put something into search, and so you put something into search, and then that brings you down to the next step of the funnel, which means that now you're looking at search results or you're browsing categories. And what we would say is that your intent as you move through this funnel actually gets stronger until you're actually on the product page or you're in checkout. That means that your intent to buy something is incredibly high. You've already committed to it, done research, and put it into your shopping cart. And so with this feature that we were looking at, we had a capability on the product page, and we wanted to bring it up funnel to introduce the ability for users to indicate their intent earlier. And so that was the goal of this project. And as you can imagine, there's a certain risk or reward behind this type of a project. For the site, we have millions of customers a day looking at this, which means if we do something wrong or break it or it takes up too much space so that people who don't care about our feature are just seeing your feature for half the screen, and so we're taking up that time and space and attention, then we could actually hurt conversion, meaning that people are not making purchases, and we're just hurting our metrics and not really delivering value to our customers or the business. The other side of that, though, is if we are able to match that intent fairly well, then we're actually providing quite a benefit. So this company here has a button on a product like card, and that's a really highly valuable piece of real estate. And because there's so many users available, we could actually make a difference in hundreds of thousands of dollars just by moving things 0.5%, for example. So after we've kind of defined this area that we want to work in, which maybe took a couple weeks or so to think about this button, we go into this designing and planning phase where I partnered with a designer who's a graphic designer and very familiar with our system and our site. And they worked on developing what the button should look like, what the text should be. We actually have a content strategist whose job is to help you define what the words are that you use on the button. And then we might build a prototype and put it into user testing, which is a pretty cool software platform that you can put the prototype in, and then potential customers might interact with it, and they're talking out loud as they interact with the prototype. So you might give them several tasks like, go find this, or you want to buy this, tell me how you would do it. So as a PM, once we have the prototype out there, then I'm spending time either watching those user testing sessions live or watching the recordings and taking notes to make sure that I still think we're building the right thing and that people are interacting with it correctly. At the same time, we're basically ironing out our requirements. A lot of companies refer to this as a product requirements document. It can be multiple pages, 20 pages. Amazon does a cool news page, and I've been doing user stories recently. Yes.
Tonja? Yeah, interrupting you again, but we have another question.
Yeah.
As a product manager, which phases are you heavily involved in?
Yeah, so I think people are involved in different phases, and I love this question, because some people might have strengths in different phases of the process. I prefer the new product development space, which means I'm much more focused on discovery, on testing product market fit. I'm not as interested in optimizations. And a button is a great example of an optimization. So a button is something we're putting out there, or maybe we're putting a filter out there, and a person, we have lots of PMs who are focused on that. And I'm sure you can think of many companies who have PMs who will be focused on optimizations, that's deciding how big to write a text, what the button should be like, or, you know, are we using the right kind of filter? And you're really tweaking things by percentages. And for those, the skill set is fairly different. So when you're thinking about the later stage, a product that is more mature, so the launch phase, then you might be looking more at analytics and looking at different kind of quick tests. Yes, Shreya.
Yeah.
Do I need to dive deeper here in the question or pivot?
Not really. Like, we have another question from
Okay.
She's asking us, referring to what she just said about the prototype, does the company select certain people to see how things go, or does it go random?
Yeah, so user testing is a service, and basically what you do when you have an account with user testing is you set up an experiment and say, okay, I want this to go to people within this age range of this demographic, maybe who are on an Android, and you basically put the test out there with times that you're available if you're going to do live sessions. And user testing, the platform actually goes and finds those people. If they have a whole panel of folks, and so if they meet your criteria, they can answer questions to kind of survey into it. And if they meet your criteria, then they can schedule that appointment with you to be part of that. That's one way of doing testing, though. So within the company today, we've also seen other types where, for example, our research team is testing prototypes internally with employees. Samsung did the same thing, actually. They did lots of tests where they would ask folks to put input into the products, and just asking the employees and stuff first before going live. So you can definitely tailor that depending on the company approach, but there's lots of really cool tools for testing. Okay, so let's say we have this goal, we're kind of looking at a fairly large potential impact with all these users, and now the designer and the content strategist feel happy with where they've landed after doing some of the testing and getting people's feedback, and now the requirements are written up. So the next step in this process for my button was building. And basically, as we're going through this, because I work with other product managers and we share an engineering team, you have different features that are being run by different product managers that are really listed out in the backlog. And that backlog is then being prioritized collectively by us and our manager based on impact, or for some other reason, like maybe it unblocks other things that have a high impact, or maybe our front-end developers are available to do work, and so even though it's lower priority, they have nothing else to do, so they get to do that. I think one of my favorite call-outs here is in interviews, people ask you, oh, well, how do you prioritize? And the answer they're looking for is based on this one metric. But that's not really how things actually get built in the real world. Sometimes it's just because that team was available, and this was the 5th item, so it was lower than others, but the team was able to work on it. So once your item is ready to be worked on, then for this project, then I was participating in daily stands with our engineers. So the engineers might have a team of several engineers working on this pretty much every day. And in those daily stands, they might be like 15 minutes or so where everyone's kind of reporting on their progress for the sprint. And within those 15 minutes, they might say, hey, I have hit a blocker, or I need help. Somebody is trying to add a project onto my backlog. What is the new priority?
We have another question from Priyanka. She's asking us, what is the product prioritization model you would suggest, or something you are using currently?
Yeah, so when I think of my product roadmap, I'm actually, for my roadmap, I actually have certain success criteria defined. So for my current project, I want to make it easier to acquire more merchants and increase repeat transactions. So those are basically my 2 performance indicators that I'm focused on. And then I kind of stack rank everything based on those impacts for those metrics. Now, the reality is, and we'll kind of get into this in a second, is that I don't want to build everything at once. It doesn't make sense to build an entire suite of products at one time. What I want to do is actually test the concept first. And that's why I was saying earlier that I kind of like that new product development space more. So what I have to do, instead of thinking of the suite of everything I want to do for this project, I think of that first minimum viable product, which is what's the bare minimum we can build to test this out. And then we test it out. And I'll talk about that in the next example a little bit. We test that out, and if it proves the case, then that kind of unlocks the next set of features. So that's how I think of it. Other PMs might have other ways of kind of prioritizing items. Okay, let me know if there was another question, Shreya.
There was, but whatever you just said actually answered the question.
Okay, cool. So as we're speaking with the engineers, I'm also going to get pinged pretty much every day with time versus cost decisions. So usually what happens is we think we have a product defined, everyone's happy, they've started working on it, and then they uncover, oh, you know what? This actually wasn't built that way. So what we thought we could do is not possible. So then they'll go to me and ask me as the PM to make a decision on, hey, do we still want to build this the way you initially wanted, or is this other adaptation okay to do? And so that's where I need to basically make the time or cost decision of, do we want to get out quicker so that we can test something and have a fast follow by adding that feature functionality later? Or is this something that keeps us from launching the product? And then finally, with this example, we also had TPMs. That's our technical program manager. And they're basically asking, hey, are you on time? Is anything running late? Of these 4 other groups that you depend on, do we need to bug them some more to make sure that they look at your code and can release it, for example? So for this button, we probably spent 2 weeks working on the building. And that basically led us to the time for launch. While the engineers were working on building, I was building out a test plan. And that meant using SQL or taking a look at our Tableau dashboard to understand, okay, how many users might see this feature and how many might click on it, and kind of creating this test plan to say, okay, I want 95% certainty that we've moved the needle for our customers by 5%. So how many people need to see this before we can consider whether the test has increased conversion, or is flat, or is actually hurting conversion. And within Groupon, they do an excellent job. They had a whole group of data scientists that would check your test plan and make sure that it's statistically sound. So each feature then would get approved by the statisticians and is associated with a kill switch. So there's a software where you can say, okay, the feature is ready, I'm going to turn it on, and it's going to get bucketed so that half of our customers see it, and they're in the treatment group, so group A, and then the other half are in the control group, and they're in group B. And then we use our data analysts to basically track how the experiment is running. Now, for this experiment, it probably took 2 weeks because there were millions of users every day interacting and seeing it to measure an impact. We've had other experiments that take 6 weeks, and it's still very difficult to call just because of the amount of interaction that happens. And finally, after you've gone through the 2 weeks and your data analyst is verifying what the impact was of the feature, you can decide whether you want to roll it out or not. So in this case, we picked to roll out our button, announced it to everyone, and then my next step is to make sure I'm scaling it. So if we only released it in one country, what do we have to do to release it in the other countries? Or for one category, how to expand it to other categories. So this is kind of the day in the life of for something as simple as a button. And as you can imagine, being a PM, it's kind of every couple days you're focused on something different for this feature that maybe had like a 2-month kind of window from start to being launched and rolled out. And I'm going to switch to the next example. So if you have questions, now is a good time.
We have a question. Alice is asking what product metrics a product manager should focus on.
So that's a great question. And that really depends on what you're trying to impact. And actually, product managers spend a lot of time talking about that. We actually have our C-suite spending time talking about that. So our C-suite, like our CEO and chief product officer, might be discussing, what do we care about? Do we care about conversion, meaning that people see something and they actually convert and buy it? Or do we care about engagement, meaning people come in and they're really more likely to click? Facebook cares a lot about engagement, right? So they want people to click like buttons and to comment and stuff like that. Amazon probably cares a lot about conversion. Within Groupon, we have to decide and debate what our key metric is, and sometimes that's not always financial related. So for this for this button, it was probably more engagement related, meaning we wanted to have people interact with it, and we just didn't want to hurt conversion, meaning we didn't want it to have a cost. In the project I'm currently working on, the thing that we care about most is making it easier for us to sign up more merchants. So that means looking at our sales close rates, which is a very different type of metric. So it really depends on what kind of goal you're trying to move. Thank you for that.
We have another question from Asha. She's asking, what is the importance of engineers and technical teams as stakeholders? How do you integrate them into the overall product management pipeline?
Yeah, so our engineers are incredibly important. And each company will interact differently. So in a prior company, I was basically the kind of the guardian of the engineers, where even the CEO might say, hey, I want you to do this. And they kind of had to go through my backlog list and my prioritized list of what we wanted to do for the company. And the engineers could rely on me to protect them from like a frivolous request. And they could also rely on me to protect them from people who didn't understand what technology was capable of. In my current team, I basically work with our engineers every single day, trying to understand what the limitations are. So we've kind of switched more into an agile method so that we're iterating and changing our plans almost every day, where they're discovering what's technically possible. And I'm trying to then, based on that, decide what's best for the customer. And you'll see more agile org structures adapt that kind of much more iterative process and that earlier stage partnership much more. Other stakeholders, and this is where I have one last slide that talks about your skill sets that you may want to develop. So stakeholder management is one of the most important things for a product manager. In this example, I did not have control over anyone I talked to. So I didn't have control over the designer or the engineers. And so what that means is that we all need to be aligned. And I need to ask them for their time to help me with this initiative. Obviously, if the CEO says, hey, this is very important, they're more likely to give me time. But I think something that maybe women tend to work on a lot is having those soft skills and getting people to buy in. So within my company, it was very important that within joining fairly quickly that I was able to have a very approachable reputation and be seen as easy to work with, but also kind of an exciting person to work with to help move things forward.
Okay, we have another question. Akansha is asking, does it happen that in A/B testing, the product fails, and what is done from that point? Is the product dropped, or they think about tweaking it and relaunch?
Great question, Akansha. Actually, that's an even better question than you may think. I think Google only expects 10% of their experiments to succeed. So one of the biggest things that a company can do is change the way it is culturally thinking about testing and success. So in this case, success in testing should maybe be focused much more on testing a lot and learning quickly. So that's where having a minimum viable product and then kind of creating a smaller version of your product first to test quicker is more important, instead of being so invested in having every single idea work and be successful. So if we were being honest with ourselves, we should expect that 9 out of 10 of our tests, or some other rate maybe, which is true for that company, should fail. And sometimes if it is negative, often the feature might have the kill switch, meaning we turn off the treatment and everyone goes back to seeing how it used to be originally. And then the product manager might go back, rethink, okay, do we need to try a different design? Maybe we're not meeting product market fits, or some other types of questions. Can we leverage what we learned? And my next example actually does touch on that just a little bit.
Okay, I think this is the last question as of now. Can you explain more about peak treatment? What peak treatment means?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So an A/B test is where you decide that people go into 2 groups. One group is the treatment group, which means that they get to see the feature. And the other group is a control group, meaning they don't see the feature. So you can think of this for this button, that means half of the people in our control group did not see the button, and then the other half did see the button who got the treatment. And that way we can actually do analytics and compare how the control group did compared to the treatment group and see, did one of them convert better? So that's how we get into the statistics there to decide if the button is an enhancement for folks. Thank you. All right, so moving over to example 2 of a day in the life of, and please continue asking questions. For this one, it was very different. So this was not about no button. This is actually an entire platform or technology solution that involved AI. And our goal here was basically to embed this IP, or embed a best practice into the day-to-day process of a user. One thing I was thinking of as an example for this is, let's say you do running videos on YouTube, but you might be, if you wanted to be in the day-to-day process of the user, maybe you want to be on their Fitbit, or maybe you want to add some tech into their shoes or something like that. So that's what we were looking for. And when I joined this company, they basically asked me to think about what that might be and to try to define it. So that was a very ambiguous problem that I was given. Just like, oh, we want to enter this space and have something in the day-to-day. And that's fairly normal for product managers, where you hear from above or somewhere, or you get the notion yourself that, I think there's a problem here or an opportunity here. Let me think about that more and discover it some more. So this vague, ambiguous request led to a lot of discovery. And that was that first phase of, is there a there? So here I conducted competitive analysis for maybe a month, where I was researching different companies, what their trends were with technology. I was also interviewing customers, because it was a business to business company. we had our sales team and our account managers had really good relationships with our customers. And that's a fairly large difference between B2B and B2C. For you know, a B2C, that's like an e-commerce platform. So I was able to go to our account managers and ask them, hey, do you have some customers who might be willing to talk to me for an hour? Can I interview them? And we conducted 50 interviews of our customers. And we also set up a conjoint survey, which is a type of survey where you ask people to make trade-offs between different features. Where the thinking is, if I'm a person, I'll say, oh, I like green, but I also like windows. But if I'm in a conjoint survey, then I have to decide between green or windows. And eventually, if you ask me for 10 different comparisons, you can really see which one I care the most about. And all of this research, that probably took 3 months of analysis, interviews, sending out a survey, and that was working with some company, I think, in the UK, maybe, to draft the survey, ended up in a presentation for the CEO where we presented this is there to them and said, hey, all of this analysis makes us think that this might be a really profitable space for us to work in. But upon presenting to the CEO, he was really excited about the idea, but then said, you know what? I think we should test this some more. Let's do some more discovery and more research. So we went into the next phase of testing and scoping. And now this is a different kind of test compared to an A/B test. And again, the phrase of minimum viable product comes forward. So the goal is not to build everything when you think that you have a solution. The goal is to identify maybe whether that solution is a good fit. So what we did is we did a testing called Concierge Testing, which is, instead of automating a software, I had 4 people that I was able to borrow from the business, and the 5 of us created these reports, basically research reports for our customers, where again, we managed to use our relationship with our big businesses. So these are Fortune 100s, Fortune 500s, ask them, hey, would you be willing to participate in a pilot with us? Can you lend us some users? And we want to try giving you this product and see how it works. So the 4 folks and myself would spend hours creating, you know, a 10-page report that user could then use for their conversations. And then we would check in with them and say, hey, was it helpful? Which parts did you like? Which parts did you not like? Was there anything that surprised you? Did we miss the mark entirely? So this is very much a concierge testing. Zappos is really famous for that because they just took pictures of the shoes in the shoe store next door or something, put them on the website, and that way they never actually bought shoes. And the test was, oh, well, people buy shoes online. And after doing this testing, basically codified our results and said, okay, is there anything here that we might be able to standardize with technology? Are we able to potentially use AI to do the manual work that we did to provide this product to these users? And that's where I was, again, looking at other competitors out there and potential small startups to think about building or buying them. And that led us to the should we build it question. And a couple of things happened here, which, you know, speak more to this failure or stopping an initiative. The world continued moving as we did all of this. So, you know, that discovery phase took several months, and then the concierge testing took several more months. So we probably spent 6 months on this discovery, and 2 of our biggest competitors announced that they were investing a ton into AI. That was right where we wanted to go. And that, you know, probably almost made me cry because I was like, oh no, how can we compete with these? But I also felt validated because it meant that we had really defined the product and that product market fit fairly well, or at least that the competitors also agreed with all the research I had done. And then the other thing was looking at our in-house capabilities within the company. the company is founded on research, so they always wanted to learn more. So every time we presented some findings saying, yes, I think we're there, they'd be like, oh, that sounds really good. Let's look into this some more. And then the other thing was we didn't have a budget to compete with those major investors. So what that really led to was this decision to sunset. So it kind of skipped quite a few stages in that product development or product life cycle. And I chose that instead of saying yes to my leaders, saying yes, yeah, let's look into this some more, to really say, you know what, I think my time's better served if we don't keep investing here. Ultimately, I don't think we can win in this space. So I had to present that to our leadership and guide them towards that conversation. But we were able to basically take a lot of those learnings from all of those reports and that manual work and the competitive research and create a pretty cool guide that we were then able to give our customers for free and just say, hey, if you want to try improving your day-to-day process, here are a couple things that you could focus on to see if you can increase our impact. So that's the other story. And I really like to compare and contrast these because one is a button, which, for a product manager, the process was not as interesting as the second one, which is this massive project, but the impact was huge where, you could potentially change revenues by hundreds of thousands or millions and millions of dollars, depending on what kind of little project, or little button or optimization it is and the scale that your company has, versus a B2B solution, where again, it could have been a game changer, and it probably was a game changer for those competitors, but ultimately, I as the PM had to decide to let it go. So now's a good time, and I do want to, so we can probably do 5 minutes, I think, of questions, because I know Shreya has a couple extra slides afterwards too. And if we have no questions, or while people are thinking or wanting to unmute, I'll just give a couple things that I thought might be helpful. There we go.
Snigdha raised her hand. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Tonja. Thank you for giving this wonderful presentation. It was a crash course for me in product management, honestly, because I'm a computer science student. I'm a graduate student, and one thing that I wanted to question you was that you started your journey as a human resource intern, and then you moved towards the product development domain. My question to you would be that for someone like me who is a graduate student, a software developer, wherein I can use my technical side for this role, how can I make that jump into this role without having the management skills and without having the proper training for that? And if I do require some training, what are those things that I should, start learning?
Thank you. One thing that you'll notice as you speak to product managers is that nobody actually was educated in product management. It just doesn't exist as a track. So that means that you have people coming from very diverse backgrounds, and many, many people do have a technical background, and I think it's incredibly helpful to have that technical background when you are looking into your career. One of the biggest things you can do for yourself is make sure that you're communicating upward. If you can get a product management role within your company, that you're making it known that you're interested in that, so that your manager and others can help open the door for having those conversations and talking about, oh, maybe you should try this project because that project can help you develop skills, or this project might showcase your stuff very well within the company. So definitely using your company to showcase what you have is very helpful. And then if you're looking into getting into it from like at a graduate level and stuff, many companies do hire people with MBAs or tech degrees into product management. on the left here, I wanted to call out some of my favorite skills that I think are very helpful, especially this communication styles and stakeholder management, getting involved with somebody who maybe has a startup and trying to help them out, because that entrepreneurship will really help you focus on MVP testing, so that minimum viable product, getting customer feedback, strengthening stats or SQL as a skill set, the user research I already talked about, and then projects, you know, showing that you can manage your project. So that was a nice segue into this slide too, so I appreciate the question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Akansha, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi. So, as product manager, how do you pick the team of engineers? Like, is it the teams that are impacted by your change? You pick it like that, or how do you reach out? And what is the ground level work done to form a team of engineers?
Yeah, that really depends on the company. So I have heard, I think in Facebook or Google, I think sometimes you can say, oh, I want to work on this thing. And then you can go and find people who are excited and bought in and try to work on it. With our current company, you know, the groups of engineers are fairly well defined based on their expertise. So in my case, the project I'm working on right now actually doesn't have a dedicated group of engineers. Rather, I'm borrowing from 10 different groups of engineers. And in order to do that, I had to talk to the product managers that were aligned with each of those groups and the high up, you know, stakeholders, and get their approval to borrow the time. That's a great question. It totally depends on the org sometimes.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I have one more question. So how do you see career growth for program manager versus product manager, like in 5 years or long term down the line?
I don't know. I think that depends on where you want to go and what you find that you like for those roles. So if you really love all the stakeholder management, then continuing in program management might be really good. If you want to work in a startup or kind of start your own, not start your own company, but like run a feature set, that can also be good. Honestly, I think it depends. Sometimes the names aren't that well defined depending on the company. So it kind of depends, but I think a lot of people who want to become CEOs might start in product management, but you also see lots of chief financial officers or operations officers do that path too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We have one really interesting question from She's asking, how involved is a product manager with the product once it has been launched?
You know, that is a good question too. One of the challenges a product manager has is to try to shorten that feedback loop as much as possible with the customer. So in my case, if I can be a customer of my product, I am learning much more. So I might try it out and realize, oh, you know what, that experience is kind of clunky. And actually, I think when you join a company, that's probably one of the best times to get your feedback for everything you want to improve. And be fairly careful about how you advertise that. You can hold on to the list for some time if you're not sure about the politics, but that's when you're thinking very freshly about the product and the things you want to do. And then it's our challenge as we get more used to it to keep trying to use it and be familiar with it, but also to make sure that we're talking to the customers who do use it and get that feedback. So the goal is a lot, but that's not always the case. And that can be a challenge, and it's hard to find that time sometimes.
All right, we have one more question from Alice. She's asking, she wants to know if your marketing background helped you in your product management role. If so, in what ways?
Yeah, absolutely. So marketing, I think the early careers where I was a marketing intern and then a marketing manager, it was really, again, learning to understand the customer, understand the competitive landscape. So you can leverage that skill set of understanding what your competitors are doing, how to position something. There's like the product, price, promotion, place, parts of marketing, and part of this too, this user research. So, you know, it's all really voice of customer, and those are the people. People are biased about who they think makes a great product manager, but ultimately, if you understand your customers incredibly well, that is going to be a really good advocate for the customers. So anything you can do to increase that skill set, and also recognize that you might be biased. So I can't say, oh, I think this product should be this because this is how I use it. I need to then look at the customer as a whole, and not just my own bias of who I am and my preferences, by doing the research, by doing the A/B testing, by doing a survey. But I think our chief product officer had a marketing background, so it's pretty common for people to kind of float between these areas.
All right, I think that is all the questions that we have. And with that, thank you, Tonja, for an amazing presentation. We all got to learn so much about the role. And to our audience, we would like to do better. Tell us how we did, and feel free to send in your feedbacks on our like social media pages, or like email us your feedback. We'd be really happy to go over them and improve as we go on with the webinars. And with that being said, I'd like to share my screen one last time. Let me see. Okay. So yeah, let's connect. While we are ending the session in a couple of minutes, we don't want to end the connections we have made today. So drop in your LinkedIn accounts in the chat. And I guess I'm gonna do that too. So let's do that. Let's connect, and I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to like visit the LinkedIn profiles and send in connect requests. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for asking a lot of questions and making this session really interactive. And yeah, once again, Tonja, thank you so much for your time. We're really grateful to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I hope it's been beneficial, and please give us ideas for improvement. So thank you again, everyone.